Well, good morning. I am so excited to have my very special guest, Christopher Norton, today. I want to welcome Christopher. My name is Glory St. Germain from Ultimate Music Theory, and today we are talking about how to discover 5 tips on how to start improvising and composing, and Christopher's going to lead us through that one step at a time. So I want to say welcome, Christopher. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
Well, Christopher Norton, of course, he's kind of famous, so you probably all know, but I do want to tell you that he is now Canadian-based composer living in Ontario, and he's a presenter who is one of the world's most popular composer on contemporary popular music, including his Microjazz series, Connections for the Piano, and American popular piano, and thousands of other ones. I don't know how you manage it all. Can you start us off, Christopher, with how did you start in your music lessons?
I started my lessons with a nun, actually, in New Zealand. The local teachers who were regarded as good were from a convent. So I was obviously very musical, and my mother took me along to see if she could get me in for lessons. We didn't have a piano at that point even. It was so obvious I was musical. She had to rent a piano and get me lessons. And I started at the age of 8, but I was already playing by ear. I had a church background. My father was a minister, in fact, so I could play the whole repertoire of church pieces by ear in any key. So without realizing it, I was already kind of on the way to sort of improvising and composing, although I didn't formally start composing until I was 14. I listened to lots and lots of music, of classical music in particular, and only then did I suddenly think I'd like to have a go myself. So quite a late starter.
Wow. Well, and certainly sometimes it's just, your passion and your path is already mapped out for you, and we're so glad that it was, because obviously piano teachers such as myself, and I should give a welcome out to all of our piano teachers and our Ultimate Music Theory certified teachers that are joining us today. And for our viewers, if you just want to jot a little note in the chat box to say, yes, I love Christopher Norton's music, and I want to learn how to improvise, just share with us where you're at in your musical journey, because it's one thing to teach piano, but it's another thing to get started with composition. And unlike yourself, Christopher, for many teachers, we sort of teach the book the way we see it, and if we haven't had that gift as you have in improvising, we just don't really know where to start. So can you give us sort of our first tip on how can we just get started with composition? Like, what's the first thing we can do?
Funny enough, when I have a group of children with me, or a child, one of the things I say to them is can you play me middle C? Mm-hmm. And in a sense, I say, you've started. Because when I'm writing, anything is a starting point. Right. And in fact, the moment I play that, I'm thinking of something quite lyrical starting on the C. You know what I mean? And of course, the moment you play that, above. I mean, what I'm saying is everything you do is a starting point. It's like trying to write a piece of prose in a way. You say to somebody, they say to you, I can't think of anything. Say, so could you write the word the? And then say, okay, what follows that? And children generally find that they can think of something if they're trying to write a piece of prose, or if they're trying to sing a little tune where you start the first phrase and they try and continue it. Right. I think often you just got to think, start somewhere where the child is. In other words, something they can do very easily, and then say, let's just gradually pull it away from there. I mean, it's a funny thing to say, but don't start complicated. Start as simple and basic as possible, and just let them, in a way, do something which they feel comfortable with, and then say, now that you have done that, let's do this. Right. And in fact, taking C again, just playing C to D, there's suddenly a relationship between those two notes. And students like that. I mean, in other words, say to them, let's just use 2 notes and make up a tune using only 2 notes.
Well, so And when you say it that way, Christopher, it does seem like, okay, well, that's easy. Anybody can do that. So it is a really good starting point to just say, well, let's just begin with C and a step or a skip or, you know, a slight pattern. And so now we have sort of those steps. And then how would we get started sort of feeling the beat? So we've got
I use backing tracks. I mean, you mentioned some of the series I've worked on. Microjazz, American Popular Piano, Connections, all have tracks.
Right.
And I'm very pleased with the tracks for those series. They tend to be quite authentic sounding, and also, particularly American Popular Piano, quite kind of friendly styles, if you like. They're not too jazz in inverted commas. I mean, jazz I heard defined recently as a lot of men showing off. And what I mean is, it can be a bit esoteric as a field for children to be delving in. I'm talking about jazz, like popular songs from the 40s or whatever.
Yes.
But in fact, a lot of the material which I do is actually a lot more straightforward than that. And I've got a little track set up here. It's a piece called Toledo from American Popular Piano 2. I hope you can hear this okay on this broadcast, but here's a bit of the track. So here's a little counter, and it plays like this. Okay, now that actually uses 2 chords. It's A minor to D minor 6, as it happens. Students don't really know what the chords are, but when I ask them to play something, and if it's an A minor, which this is, I say, don't play middle C, let's play A, because it's the key note. You don't need to explain even that that's the key note. Right. Just say the note A seems to be a nice one to play with the track. And then I say to the student, let's try just playing whole notes on A. Actually, more than whole notes. I'm going really slow forward there.
Yeah.
Now stop. So the moment a student does that with a track, in a way, they're creating a relationship between the notes they're playing and the track. And of course, it gets super exciting when you add B. In other words, it gives you 2. But what I'm saying is I'm starting with some very straightforward things that they can easily play with a track.
Yes.
That's the thing I like to do. This piece, incidentally, like many of the pieces in American Popular Piano, has a teacher accompaniment as well, a nice teacher accompaniment, which is not hard to play, which you can use instead. But the track it's got the whole kind of reference points, if you like. It's got an acoustic guitar, bass and drums, and percussion. So there's childish feelings there. They're part of an ensemble, but they're also it's those relationships between the pitches that you're playing and the track, which actually jazz players really enjoy. In other words, when you suddenly play a B or a C with that track, how it sounds as it chords shift around it is part of the pleasure of improvisation.
Yes.
I hope it's clear. But what I'm saying is starting very, very simply with just whole notes, and then perhaps going to half notes, and then going to quarter notes. And of course, at a certain point, the student thinks, "Oh, this is a bit plain," and they start to kind of add their own little rhythms in. I mean, this happens with just about every student I've ever come across. And of course, at that point, you say, "I didn't tell you to do that, but now that you are doing it, let's do that." In other words, let's try a bit of your own tune. And shall I give you an example of that?
Yes, please. Yeah. I've used it.
Just take a whole note. Here's the whole note. Now, half notes. Now, quarter notes. Now, the moment I say quarter notes, I started playing a mixture of quarter notes and half notes.
Right.
In other words, if you tell the student to do just quarter notes, they're going to end up thinking, "Oh, this is not really sounding that great. Let's have some half notes as well."
Yeah.
I think it's basically using the track to kind of guide the proceedings. But you can tell there's a nice little sort of tune developing there, which you could make into something quite nice. And I've only used 2 notes so far.
Right.
So I think we're going to talk in a moment about the idea of using more than 2 notes. But that's my starting point, is to say play 1 note, then put a track on, and then say, "Oh, let's play that note with the track."
Yes.
And now that you've got that note, let's play in different note values. And once you've got the note values, let's use more than one note. I mean, it's kind of common sense, isn't it?
I've used your tracks, obviously, with all of my students, and you met some of them when you were doing a workshop here in Winnipeg, and autographed their books, and they were like so thrilled that they had your autograph in their book, and they loved that composing. And I think the wonderful thing about you providing the backing tracks for those, Christopher, is that when you start to do improvising and composing, if you have those backing tracks, then there's a pulse, there's that rhythmic feel that almost keeps you in time, because otherwise, if you're just noodling around, you don't feel as successful as if you're using the backing track. Right. You're already getting into it. And I know you talked a little bit about a one-note rhythm. Yeah. Can you share a little bit about what's a one-note rhythm and how can we use that?
Well, what I tend to do with students as a second step, if you like, having done that kind of stuff with one note and effectively a pulse.
Yes.
But doing the pulse as half notes, as whole notes, as quarter notes, even excitingly as eighth notes. You can then suggest that you can clap a rhythm to the backing track. And what I do is I just clap one. Now I'm going to clap one. Now, I don't even know what I'm going to do until I do it.
Right.
But I do the same thing with students. I say, could you try and clap a rhythm? But I demonstrate first. So here's me demonstrating. Here's my rhythm. It's going to be exciting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, you like that?
Yes, I like that.
Okay, now then I say to them, we're still on A. And interestingly enough, you're not just talking about playing a rhythm on the piano, you're kind of talking about phrasing as well, because I'm not just going, I'm actually going da, 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 da. For some reason, I've started to introduce some staccato notes and some legato notes when students do the same thing.
Right.
And why that is because you're working in a particular style. This piece here is a slightly Spanish sounding track of anything. It's only got two chords, but it has that kind of Spanish feel. And therefore, dum, 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 and you expect castanets and so on. So what I'm doing is giving them a rhythm, getting them to clap it back to me, and then getting them to play that rhythm on the keynote. Now, the moment you then say, let's play that rhythm on the keynote, but use two notes, in other words, you use A or B, you're starting to compose. And in fact, if I then say we're going to go to the wilds of C, we're going to have three notes. Or now, did you notice then I immediately did what students do? I added another rhythm in. Dun, do, 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 do. That suddenly something occurred to me which would be nice to do. And this is what happens by using this approach, is you're kind of letting them guide the proceedings slightly. It's a funny thing to say, but so often students don't get the chance to do that.
Right.
And when I work with students, I was working with some yesterday, I've discovered that everybody has something different to bring to the piano when they're making something up. That they've all got subtle differences in what they have listened to, what sort of music they like. So you're finding the sort of individual voice of each student quite quickly through these simple little exercises.
Yes, yeah. I think one of the things too, and you just said something that really sort of the light bulb went off in my head, because when you are doing that composition and improvisation and just sort of exploring, it is amazing what children will come up with, because their imagination, they'll just try it, because I mean, they always say you're just like a semitone away from the right note. Yeah. But there's no mistakes. It's just exploration. And in fact, sometimes you'll take that little semitone and turn it into a grace note. And one of the things I wanted to share with our viewers was that Christopher actually has created a PDF for us, which is 10 terrific tips on composing. So if you want to just type the word composing into the chat, we'll be sure to send you the link, and we'll put that in there after in the show notes. So go ahead and just type in composing, and we'll make sure that you get that download PDF, because there's a lot of great tips in there. And I think the first step too is just to get started, not to be afraid, right? Because you can create a one note rhythmic pattern and just kind of explore and evolve from that. And so what would be then the next step? So we've kind of taken those, now we're up to 3 notes. We've learned a one note rhythmic pattern, and what would be perhaps a musical structure, or how could we use this to now kind of, we're excited, now we want to grow and create our own melody?
I think one of the things I say to students is try and think of a little idea which you can repeat. Now it's amazingly difficult to do that when you first try it, because students are playing things, they like the sound of them, but they don't necessarily can't even remember one measure. So I'm used to doing this, of course. So I'm going to play a little repeated melody here for you. Okay, that's all I'm talking about. That's go to da dee dee dee. It's quite a nice little tune there. Yeah. And so the next thing to ask the student, if they're using the rhythm which I've given them as a starting point, but I'm saying if you've slightly started to amend that rhythm yourself, find your own version of my rhythm initially, but even of your own rhythm. And in fact, I do say to them quite quickly, go crazy. In other words, just try your own thing. Now I'm going to go crazy. In other words, I've just been playing that, but I'm going to use 5 notes now, because of course you can use A, B, C, D, and E. And I'm just going to do something of my own. What's this going to be like? Okay, so that's different, isn't it? I've used 16th notes there as well. Some students do that. But that was still repeating the idea. And I think that's the next step, if you like, is to get a little rhythmic figure going, which is repeated, so that you're getting a kind of melodic structure thing going. Because, of course, there's a famous jazz thing which I heard, which I thought was wonderful. It said that if you have too much repetition, you bore the listener. If you have too much variation, you alienate the listener.
Yeah, actually.
It's a balancing act between repetition and variation. And, of course, the next thing is variation. And I played this tune, which is quite nice. Now, if I change one note of that, suddenly you've got a lovely variation. It has amazing effect. So I've changed the last note to a D instead of an A, and then I play the first one again. And what I often say to students in melodic structure terms, it feels right to play a different idea to finish off, but I don't say what that is. So here's me doing my complete tune. This is very exciting. Get the idea? So then we've got a complete structure. If you're going to put it, I don't go into this until students are perhaps 3 years into to study, but you could end up doing the left hand. And suddenly we've got a piece which I could probably, get onto the syllabus.
Yes.
It's a nice little composition, and in fact, keeping the left hand very, very simple, just repeating A, E, A, E, A, D, A, D, is a nice little accompaniment, and it's got a particular character, hasn't it? Yes. I think the use of the track helps to anchor them in a particular stylistic area as well. It gives it a groove, I think I call it. This has got a particular groove, this track, and Connections, I think, has got 185 tracks altogether. Microjazz has probably got another 60, and American Popular Piano, I don't know, there's tracks across 9 levels, so it's at least 60 again. So there's perhaps, I've certainly got 300 tracks, because there's other books as well with tracks, and they're all different grooves. Somebody actually asked me recently who my major influences were, and I said, well, one of the big influences early on was my favorite composer for years when I was a teenager was Nielsen.
Yes.
The Danish composer, and the other one was Ray Charles.
Yeah.
strangely eclectic, because I got into popular music when I was a teenager, late teenager, and discovered I really liked R&B and soul in that area rather more than any other area. So a lot of the things I've done have grooves. In fact, the most famous example of it, I think, one of my most popular pieces, you know that one, which is called Intercity Stomp. Have you guessed? Just Beat It. It's in the same groove as Beat It by Michael Jackson.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of the things, there's an underlying style which is actually from certain areas. So what I'm saying is, when the students are improvising, they're improvising within a particular groove. I like to put it that way. And this particular A minor one we've been doing has got a particular flavor, hasn't it?
Yes.
And they like working within something which is actually a specific flavor and style. So that's another thing which I recommend, if you like, is keep it fairly tightly anchored. Use as few notes as you can get away with initially. Give them a rhythm, and then get them to take that rhythm up and amend it. And also they can amend the notes. Sorry to introduce another element here, but students quite often play other notes than the notes which I've given them. In other words, they suddenly, if you're in A minor, they might go and want to use an F natural. And in fact, I've had some crazy examples of really good things by students. The famous one being with this piece, actually, where a little boy said to me, "Am I allowed to use F and G sharp?"
Oh.
And I said, "What do you mean?" He said,
Nice.
It's a harmonic note. So students, you've got to be alert to the fact that some are going to be hearing things which are not the obvious notes you're giving them, and be alert to saying that's nice. One other point to make, of course, you mentioned that there's no wrong notes, but in fact there are. And if you're working in a particular style, some notes don't sound very good. And I like to also say to students, that didn't sound very good, did it? And often they say, no, it didn't. Like they're finishing on a note other than the key note if it's a specific key. So, but that's the beauty of improvising in particular, I think, is that you discover that and then think, oh, next time around I perhaps just need to amend that. And the more experience they get, the more they get used to making these quick decisions to think, I know the end's coming up.
Yes.
So I should prepare for that.
One of the things I like to do with my students when we're using your backing tracks, and I say, well, you need to have a little bag of licks, right? You need to have a few little licks that, and oftentimes too, when you're listening to other musicians, you almost recognize sort of an improvisation lick that's kind of their signature lick, so to speak. So I often videotape them. So we have the backing track going and then they're doing their improvising, because as you said, alter it, or sometimes you can't remember. You just played something and it was so good, and now you can't remember what you played. So I always like to videotape them just for their own reference, so they can go, oh, that was really good. Let me play that again. And now I just want to alter the one note. And when of course I'm doing music theory with my students, and so we're talking about composing, and obviously we do that at the piano, and we use backing tracks and things like that, but we also talk about how are we going to notate this, and how are we going to sort of understand that structure. And one of the things that you and I talked about before we came live with the interview was just doing the same 2-bar melody and then repeating a note or altering the ending to maybe leave it as a question, an opening, and then bringing it to a conclusion ending on the tonic. Can you talk a little bit about how you would guide a student through just creating that phrase of question and answer?
Yeah, well, question and answer, of course, is separate. I've mentioned already the idea. I was just thinking, here's another example of altering the note, where I'd say to a student, here's a tune. And then the next phrase.
Right.
Everything you do is stimulating, because at that point you think, do I then go on to something even more extreme, or do I repeat the first phrase?
Right.
And in fact, what you can do instead of trying to repeat the first phrase is to basically do something which is an answer, which is a different idea answering the first idea. So let me just try that myself. So there's two answers, if you like, to the question.
Yes.
So you can tell, you can either take something and stick to the motive very carefully, very slavishly, not slavishly, but you know what I mean. Use that main idea, or you can think, I'm going to come up with a completely contrasting idea, and then the relationship between the two is what drives the shape of this whole thing. And of course, at that point, it's potentially getting quite a bit more extended as a melody as well. Because of course, one of the difficulties with composition is how do you write a longer piece? And one of the things to do, of course, is by having contrast and variation combined. So you're actually doing things which are, a whole paragraph can be an answer, as you'll discover with some of the wonderful. I was listening to some Beethoven symphony the other day and thinking, gosh, he was good. But he would come up with an idea, and you think, oh no, he's going to repeat that, but he doesn't. He comes up with an even better idea as a sort of next idea. He very much improvised in his mind, thinking, oh, I've just had an idea, let's do that.
Right.
So there are plenty of fantastic examples of classical composers where that they balance up the repetition of variation very, very, very well.
And when you do your composing, Christopher, do you, and I'm sorry, I mean, you obviously are at such a high level of compositions, having composed probably millions of pieces by now, but do you have a certain formula when you're composing that you start with, an idea, a title, a melodic thought or rhythmic thought? Like, what is your composing process? Like, as a professional, how does it? I mean, you could probably sit down and play for days, and we could just hit record, and then you'd have like a million pieces written. What's your
funny enough? I was thinking about this because, in fact, when I did the Connection series, there was 185 pieces to write, and I wrote a new one every day. And what I liked about it was the fact that I didn't know what I was going to do until I sat down, and every day I produced something which was quite different from the one before. But I do use different starting points, and in fact, that very idea is really that's starting with a melody.
Right.
So obviously there's that, but students quite often, if you said to them, I'm going to give you a little bit of figuration, okay? Yeah. I'm still sticking with A minor here, I don't know quite why, but if I went, obviously that's a beginning of a piece as well. You're starting with the accompaniment effectively. Right. And a danger, which quite a few teenagers have, is they write accompaniments, there's no actual melody. And quite often I take their accompaniment, which they say is their composition, and say, you've written just figuration, which is like an accompaniment. Can I try and play a tune on top of it? And I do it, and often they say, yeah, that sounds great. They just hadn't quite taken that next step. Yeah. You might have to record yourself playing the accompaniment and then try and improvise the tune across the top of it. Yeah. So there's accompaniment. And the other thing I do a lot, actually, is this. That is, I'm sitting next to a keyboard, which has got loads of drum patterns in it, and I just started drum pattern, and I find that very stimulating. If you just start with a rhythm,
yes,
because that also brings you into a particular stylistic area. But if you got a student to sit down and play something with a drum track like that, every student will come up with something different.
Yes,
I mean, there'd be a certain element in which some of the more experienced students might come up with something slightly similar because they're kind of doing what might be the baseline to that particular drum pattern. But that's a very good starting point as well. You can also start with a title. The train pulls out of the station. Spring Day. I've done that. We just start with the title. I've just written a musical on the seasons. Yes. and that, so I had a piece called Spring. And of course, the moment I'm thinking of spring, I'm thinking. I'm saying I'm doing it like a piece of film music almost, where you just kind of create a little atmosphere and ambience with a particular idea. Yeah. So there's lots of ways of getting started, and in fact, it's a good idea not to be prescriptive. But what I've been talking about to you today is the idea of getting students started where they don't know how to start.
Right.
So you just start with something very straightforward and simple, and get them past the point where they can't think of anything.
Right. And sometimes it's I think a good challenge for us as teachers to go through the backing tracks and work through this ourselves, because you know, there are many teachers. My music teacher, you know, when I was taking lessons as a young girl, you know, I don't recall her ever talking about improvising or composing or using my imagination. It was always just read the music that's on the page, and there you have it. So yeah. I think for teachers, and now that you've provided these incredible backing tracks and opportunities for us as educators, I think we need to be coachable. We need to be open to learning new things, because you can't teach it if you haven't experienced it yourself. So I see that we've got a lot of, you know, comments from our teachers here. Sounds like a pirate, very cool. Christopher says he loved your repeated rhythmic figure. Emmeline says, thank you. Love all these composing ideas, composing. Thank you. I'm here. I love listening to what you're doing with the backing track. So we've got some wonderful comments from our teachers. Don't forget to type in composing, and we're going to send you those top 10 tips. But as a teacher, so now I'm not going to be doing this with my student yet. Well, I mean, obviously I have, but I'm saying as a teacher, how would you suggest that, just for my own enjoyment and exploration, how would I just kind of get started on my own? So as teachers, we can feel confident and comfortable that, you know, we can give our students those steps.
Well, funny enough, one of them is, from my vantage point as a writer, is any of the Connections books, any of the Microjazz books, any of the American Popular Piano books, because the pieces themselves are actually in specific styles and grooves. They have a lot of licks, as you call them, you know. The one I played, Intercity Stomp, that's an interesting case, because nearly everything I write, I've discovered, is either pentatonic major or pentatonic minor. And so that particular figure is pentatonic minor.
Yes.
What I'm saying is, you just playing the pieces for a start is a great start, and then, because there are backing tracks to go with all those pieces, yes, then try the piece with the backing track. Okay. And then the next stage, of course, is to actually sort of very gently try and sort of move away from my piece. Mm-hmm. And there are two stages, of course. One of them is the right hand, where if you're playing with the track. See, I'm using a track here. The original tune of this piece, which I've got on the backing track, sounds like this. So it's very different from what I've been doing. Right. But playing that with the backing track is already great, because it's a particular thing with lots of gaps in the melody, and so it gives it a different flavor altogether. But you could use that as a starting off point for doing your own little tune. Okay. But then a lot of the time you can discover, and American Popular Piano in particular does give you left-hand chords as well. And in fact, the left-hand chords with this one, although it's an A minor, the first chord is this. So there's no third. Right. And the next chord is this, which is the first inversion of D minor, but with no D. So that's all you do. Then also, they're very easy positions to play. Yes. But you're learning jazz voicings, if you like, because the thing about jazz voicings is a lot of the time inversions are used so that you don't have to move your hand very far. Right. And also, it also has a particular sound if the bass note's being played by another instrument and you're playing in the middle of the text, you're not doubling the bass. So what I'm saying is, playing the pieces from any of those series, because teachers like playing them, and it just is a great start. And if you find a piece you really, really like, I mean, somebody mentioned again, one of the most popular pieces of mine ever is Moonscape from Connections 4. Yeah. And that's got a most wonderful ethereal backing track. It's really unusual, and people love that when they do that. I've got to tell you a little story about Moonscape, by the way. I did a masterclass, it was a couple of years ago in Canada, and I had a whole lot of children, you know, like 12-year-olds or whatever, and one man in his 50s. Oh, yes. And he was playing Moonscape. and he played it quite well. So I actually chose him to play in the recital at the end.
Yes.
And to an audience there are probably a couple of hundred people, and I interviewed him on stage and said, "Why did you choose this piece?" Because it's quite an unusual piece.
Yes.
And he said, "I heard it played at a student concert about a year ago, and I thought I've got to play that." And he said, "The thing is, at that point, I'd never played the piano before." So he actually got himself a teacher and a piano in order to play Moonscape, and then he was playing a year later. So sometimes the music itself is stimulating enough that it drives someone to actually want to play it.
Yes.
And I'm saying that should be the case with teachers. They should be stimulated enough by the piece that they want to play it with the track. And when they play it with the track, of course, you can then start to think, what are the chords of this piece? One rather amusing thing, which I realized, somebody said to me again a couple of days ago, "Why haven't you got chord symbols on your pieces?"
Oh.
And I said to them, "I don't want people to know how few chords I use." Because there's a funny thing with my work, because in fact often there aren't that many chords, but when you do analyze what the chords are, they're actually so sophisticated that it'd be off-putting to put the chord symbols down. One I've been using today, which is called Toledo from American Popular Piano 2, is got 2 chords in it, but the first chord is A minor, but the second chord is D minor 6. And you end up thinking, well, try to explain that to a 7-year-old. Now, D minor 6 chord. It's just they don't want to know, and they're not going to understand what you're saying either.
Yes. Yeah.
But for a teacher, in a way, it's quite nice to try and sort of fiddle about and try and figure out what the chords are as well.
Yes.
Because you don't need to know what they are, but it's quite nice to try and figure out what they are.
Yes.
And much of the time you can figure it out pretty easily. And much of the time, in fact, what I write down, the left-hand chords are in inversions anyway. So the left hand in the piece is itself the chords. But what you look at, like if it's a piece in C and you've got a chord of E and B flat, you suddenly think, oh yeah, that's C7, but there's no fifth and no root. But that's a very common thing, because then when you play F7, you just go down a half step. So a lot of the time, the chords are easy to play, but you look at them and think, what is that? I mean, hopefully you won't as a teacher, but students certainly, if they did think about it, they wouldn't really know what they were, but they don't mind. They just like the sound of them. And I think you want to experience, and I think the experience of playing a piece with a track is already getting you to a point where you could suddenly think, I could do things with this, even if it's just right hand.
Yes. That's one of the things that I love about using the tracks too, Christopher, is that you do have options. So, you can do it with the left hand, you can do it with the right hand, you can do it with both hands. There's a lot of opportunities to explore a whole palette of colors. And
you can do it with one note. And that's what I'm saying. I started off by saying that start with one note, find out what the key is, and play the key note.
Yes.
And then if it's in the major, start by working your way up the pentatonic major scale. If it's in the minor pentatonic scale of that key.
Yes.
If it's a blues piece, the blues scale obviously it will work. But even that may be too much information. One thing I did in American Popular Piano, which is a really sort of radical idea, but in fact it's a genius idea, if I may say so. I don't think I came up with it, but one of the team did, is the idea that you learn the piece from the book. Yes. And then the notes you use for the improvisation are the same as the notes in the piece. Now, there's a good example of that, which I use, called The Girl on the Beach, which is from American Popular Piano 1. It's in C major, and the tune is this. And that's not the whole tune, but what I'm saying, there are no more than 4 notes in the entire tune. Right. So when you improvise on it, you use 4 notes.
Yes.
But the chords underneath are they're minor 7th chords and major 7th chords, but you're only playing 4 notes against them. And in fact, that's a wonderful effect. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the other thing to do, is to take fewer notes than the implied scale and use those. Don't necessarily blearily try and say, this is a C major, I'm going to use a C major scale, because you can get yourself into all sorts of unnecessary tangles. So this idea of taking the notes of the tune you've just played and using those as the basis for your improvisation is the equivalent of saying start with middle C.
Yes.
In other words, just limit yourself to the notes you've got under your hand already. And Intercity Stomp, it's in G minor. So you've got F, G, B flat, C, D. And that's all the notes there are on the tune. So you use those notes to improvise on.
Yes.
I mean, isn't that a great idea?
It is a fantastic idea.
A very simple idea, but in fact, it stops you from getting into this terrible jazz theory thing where students are playing a piece in G minor and you say, oh yeah, that's the G minor, or that's the G mixolydian, or that, or whatever. They're thinking all the time, I don't really know what you're talking about, or they're not ready to hear it, you know.
Yes.
It's a bit like playing a Beethoven sonata and saying we're not going to play it until we've done a chordal analysis of the whole piece.
Yes.
They just want to play the tunes and hear the harmonies. You don't need to know about what the theory behind it is yet. Yes. I mean, you might be interested in a later stage when you're a teenager or an undergraduate music student, but before that, don't clog it all up with theory. That's what I say.
Yeah, I agree. We need to.
I mean, of course, you're the wrong person to say this. Don't clog it up with theory. You run a theory company. But what I'm saying is, don't make theory get in the way of just kind of trying ideas out, because you can add the theory later. And in fact, I think students, once they've understood that, they find theory very interesting. It can become suddenly fascinating because it is interesting. You know, when you get into jazz theory in particular, there's lots of good books which can tell you about the theory of what you could be doing. And it gets you into a whole other sphere, which jazz players are in. And when you hear really good jazz players, obviously they know a lot about theory, but they started with middle C.
Yes, yes. Well, I just want to thank you so much, Christopher, for all of your performing today. I've just kind of been enjoying my coffee and sharing this time with you. And I know that a lot of teachers, I should mention, make sure that you join the Ultimate Music Theory Facebook group, because we will be providing that link for you. The 10 terrific tips for starting composing and improvising. So we'll share that link with you there. You can also go to Christopher Norton Composer Facebook page to learn more about all of the series that he has for you, the Microjazz series, Connections for Piano, American Popular Piano, with sort of everything that's going on with you, Christopher. And there's a lot of things. I know you were just at the conference. What's coming up next for you? What's the next plan in your composition or your program that you're looking forward to?
Well, I've written two big piano suites for two suites for two pianos, which had lots of performances and are getting done all over the world. And for one of the duos in Minneapolis, I'm writing a sonata for piano duet next, which is good fun.
Yes.
But that's under my own imprint. I have a company called 80 Days Publishing, which does a whole lot of things which just interest me, if you like, which have actually, this company has put out the Connections series, because I now own the Connections series. It used to belong to the Royal Conservatory in Canada, but I bought it from them. So I'm the owner of Connections. So I've extended the series to Connections 9 and Connections 10, which is the next thing to come out. And that'll be available widely in North America and the rest of the world. And I thought I might just play you a little snippet of one of the new pieces from Connections 9. I'm hoping this sound on here will be good enough. It's a piece called Song for Joe. And it was a commission piece originally for someone who wanted to commission a piece for his wife, whose name was Joe. So it was rather nice. So this is just to show you something new. That's the beginning of it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
So it's a little bit harder than Connections 8, but not too much harder. But some of the ones in level 10 obviously get pretty hard. Yeah. But I'm really pleased with them. It's a new one, and it's a very wide range of styles, if you like. And that started off with that tune. I mean, it's the thing. It's a very straightforward little melodic idea, and that's where the whole piece sprung from, just from a tune.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Well, if you've inspired us today, I know that there's lots of musicians and teachers that are going to be that are on with us live, and certainly will be tuning into the replay. And I think you've really inspired us to step outside our comfort zone and explore the palette of improvising and composing, using the backing tracks, jumping into the American Popular Piano and the Connections series to just to explore, right? Just to have some fun and learn something.
And I wanted to say one other thing. I've just done this, which is actually a very useful little kind of what would you call it? E-booklet. Yes. Which details all the piano music I've done across all series by grade.
Awesome.
So it actually, that's the cover, but underneath it, see, it says here pre-grade 1.
Right.
And Microjazz for absolute beginners, Microjazz for beginners, American Popular Piano Prep, and a Canadian publication called Piano Zazz Prep, which is Deborah Wanless music. So what I'm saying, I've banded together all the things at each level, and I've also done a brief description. So I'll send you a copy, and you can then disseminate that by email to anybody who's interested. Sure. It's a very useful thing, a little guide, and it also says for Canadian and United States listeners who the distributors are, so you know where you can get them as well. Okay.
That's perfect.
I think you'll find, it just says piano music by Christopher Norton there.
That's perfect.
It's a nice picture.
Just put a little note in the chat box, piano music, and we'll make sure to get you that link so you can go to your local music store or purchase online, wherever you like to purchase music. And especially I like that you've divided it into the levels, because sometimes too, as teachers, we're like, well, I don't know what level.
That's what I discovered. I was talking about all these series and suddenly realized they go all over the place, and it became rather confusing. It's much better to do it by level.
Yes.
So I've never had this available before. I just did it I did a big workshop in Ottawa recently. Suddenly thought, how do I sort of make it clear how this all works? I saw that I should do it by, here are the easiest pieces from whatever publisher. Here are and it goes right up to level 10, because there's a jazz piano sonata at the very top, which is beyond grade 10.
Wow. Wow.
Well, whatever it's called, and that's had lots of performances as well, including lovely performances by teenagers. So obviously, even if it is very hard, if people like the idea of it, they're happy to have a go.
Yes, I think, and you absolutely said it. I have some students that are, at a higher level, and when they hear that your music, they just say, I want to learn that, even though it might be a couple of levels beyond, but because they love it, they want to learn it, and they're committed to the dedication that it takes to learn the piece.
And also, there's an element which they know what it should sound like. In other words, they start to play, they think, oh yeah, I know what the sound of this is. So your interpretation wise, they're on a better track than if they're just playing anything. I don't know quite what this is supposed to sound like.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope you're going to be coming back to Winnipeg soon to do another workshop here. I know you do traveling.
Yeah.
We'll have to.
I'll wait till the spring, I think.
Okay. That would be great. Well, I want to thank you for sharing all your fabulous ideas and playing for us today. I think we're inspired. I'm going to make sure to put those links in the show notes. So make sure you leave us a note. Just say composing. That's the top 10 tips, 10 terrific tips on composing and improvising by Christopher Norton. You can also join our Ultimate Music Theory Facebook group, and I'll be sharing Christopher Norton's catalog, if I may call it that.
The catalog is fine, yeah. I've created it myself, but it's
perfect.
Because it's spread across more than one publisher. No publisher has done it, so I figured I'd do it myself.
That's what we do, right?
Exactly.
Got to take care of it. Thanks again, Christopher. We really appreciate it.
Okay.
Make sure for joining our Facebook group. So Ultimate Music Theory Facebook group, and also Christopher Norton Composer Facebook group for more information and inspiration on how you can improvise, compose, and play the music that you've written. Thanks, Christopher. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay. Bye for now.
Bye for now.